I've stood in front of cameras my whole life, guns drawn, squinting my eyes, dust in the air. I've played the man who didn't blink when the world turned cold. I've told stories about justice, vengeance, and redemption, but I'll tell you something, none of those roles ever made my hands shake the way they did the day I decided to tell this story. This one isn't about a hero or an outlaw. It's not about Hollywood or fame or legacy. It's about something far more real, something that can't be captured by a camera lens or scripted by a director. It's about the day I came face to face with the truth that changed everything, the day I gave my life to Jesus Christ. Now, that might sound strange coming from a guy like me. People know me for being the man with no name, the one who could stare down anyone and walk away without a scratch. But behind all that grit was a man just as human as anyone else, searching for meaning, pretending he didn't need help, thinking that strength meant never bending the knee. I used to believe I had it all figured out. Success, independence, reputation, those were the gods I served. I thought being a man meant standing alone. And maybe that's what Hollywood celebrates, the myth of self-made strength. But somewhere between the lights and the silence after the applause, I started hearing something else, a question that wouldn't go away. What if all this, every award, every headline isn't the real story? For years, I brushed it off. I told myself I didn't need faith. I had control. But life has a way of humbling even the proudest men. There were nights when I'd sit in the dark, long after everyone else had gone home, and feel the weight of everything I couldn't fix, mistakes I'd made, people I'd hurt, moments I couldn't take back. And in that silence, I realized that the man who seemed unbreakable on screen was breaking quietly off it. That's when I started to see that the toughest battles aren't fought with bullets, they're fought in the heart. Telling this story isn't easy. It means stripping away the legend and letting you see the man beneath it. But I need to tell it, because I've learned that real strength doesn't come from standing alone. It comes from surrendering to something greater than yourself. So tonight, forget the cowboy, forget the tough guy. This isn't another movie. This is real life. And this time, I'm not acting. I grew up believing that strength meant standing alone. Maybe it was the era I came from, maybe it was the business I chose, but I learned early that nobody hands you anything in this world. You want respect, you earn it. You want a name, you build it brick by brick, shot by shot, scene by scene. Hollywood fed that fire. It rewards confidence, ambition, and the illusion of control, and I bought into it, all of it. I told myself I was a self-made man, a lone wolf who didn't need anyone's approval. I worked hard, fought for every role, every frame, every inch of ground I gained, and when the lights hit just right and the cameras rolled, it looked like victory. But deep down, I didn't realize I was chasing ghosts. You see, there's a strange kind of blindness that comes with success. You start to think you're invincible, that your strength is enough to keep the world from closing in. You mistake applause for purpose. I thought wisdom meant trusting myself above all else, building my own code, living by my own rules. And for a long time it worked, or at least it looked like it did. But the truth is, you can climb the highest mountain in Hollywood and still feel the ground shaking beneath your feet. The spotlight doesn't warm you, it burns. The same world that crowns you one day will forget you the next. That's the deal no one tells you when you're young and hungry. You chase fame like it's the finish line, but when you get there, you realize it's just a mirage. I used to think faith was a crutch for the weak, something people leaned on when they couldn't carry their own weight. But the older I got, the more I realized maybe I was the one limping. Because no matter how strong you think you are, life has a way of reminding you just how small you really are. A loved one gets sick, a friend dies, the phone stops ringing. And suddenly, all that self-reliance feels like an empty echo. I spent decades building a name that people would remember, but I forgot the one thing that gives life real meaning, the soul behind the name. Looking back now, I can see that the self-made man I was so proud of was really just a man afraid to admit he needed something more. And that's the thing about pride, it makes you feel powerful, right up until it leaves you powerless. You can have everything this world says matters, money, success, respect, even love, and still lie awake at night feeling like something's missing. I know because I've been there. There were years when everything looked perfect on paper. The movies were doing well, the awards lined my shelves, people called me a legend. But when the cameras stopped rolling and the house got quiet, there was this silence that wouldn't go away. A kind of hollow hum sitting somewhere deep in my chest. I tried to fill it with work, with travel, with new projects, new relationships. But the more I filled it, the emptier it felt. Funny how success can make you feel invincible to the world and invisible to yourself at the same time. You start asking questions you don't want to ask. What's all this really for? Why do I feel restless when I should feel fulfilled? I told myself it was just part of getting older. But it wasn't age, it was awareness. Awareness that everything I had built, everything I had achieved, couldn't follow me when the lights went out. It's a strange thing to realize that your greatest victories don't answer your deepest questions. You can win every award, shake every hand, stand on every stage, and still wonder, who am I when no one's watching? I remember one night, sitting alone in my workshop, surrounded by tools and sawdust, staring at something I was building that didn't really need to be built. That's when it hit me this was what I'd been doing my whole life. Building things to distract myself from the one thing I couldn't fix, the hole inside. People see your success, but they don't see the shadow it casts. I'd reached the top of the mountain only to find there was nothing there but the wind. That's when the question started to haunt me. If this isn't enough, then what is? I tried to reason with it. Maybe I needed a new challenge, a new film, a new purpose. But no matter how much I worked, it was like pouring water into a cracked jar. It just kept leaking out. That's the part nobody talks about in Hollywood. You can chase the dream your whole life, but if your soul's empty, every achievement feels like a rerun of a movie you've already seen too many times. I didn't know it then, but that emptiness wasn't a curse. It was a calling, a whisper from something greater, asking me to stop performing and start listening. It was one of those evenings when the world finally goes quiet, the kind of silence you can feel in your bones. I was alone in my workshop, surrounded by old tools, the smell of wood and oil hanging in the air. I'd spent a lifetime building things, films, characters, a career, even a reputation, but that night I wasn't building anything. I was just sitting there, staring at a half-finished piece of wood, and for the first time I wasn't thinking about the next project. I was thinking about the end. Not in a morbid way, but in an honest one. I'm no stranger to death. I've played men who stared it down, who walked into gunfights knowing they might not walk back out. I've directed stories where death was the teacher, the truth teller, the one thing you couldn't outdraw. But there's a world of difference between playing death on screen and feeling it breathing in the same room. That night I felt it not as fear, but as reality. It made me wonder, after all the noise, what's left? What really lasts when the credits roll and the lights go out? I thought about William Money from Unforgiven, a man haunted by what he'd done, trying to find redemption in a world that had already written him off. I thought about Frankie Dunn in $1 Million Baby, searching for meaning after loss, Walt Kowalski in Gran Torino, trying to make peace with his past. All those characters carried a piece of me, whether I knew it or not. Maybe that's why I told those stories, because part of me was wrestling with the same ghosts. But the truth is, I could hide behind the camera, behind the script, behind the grit and the gun smoke, and never have to face what they faced. Until that night. There's something about being alone with your thoughts that strips you down to who you really are. I realized that for all my strength, all my accomplishments, There was one thing I couldn't do: escape my own mortality. It didn't matter how many times I'd cheated death on screen, sooner or later, life calls cut, and there are no retakes. That thought didn't scare me, it sobered me. It made me see how much time I'd spent chasing things that don't follow you past the grave, and it made me wonder, what if all the stories I'd ever told about redemption weren't just fiction? What if they were whispers of something real, something waiting beyond this life? That was the night I stopped running from the question and started searching for the answer. It's funny how God uses the people you least expect to get your attention. For me, it wasn't some preacher on television or a church billboard. It was a friend, an old friend who'd known me long enough to see through the layers of armor I'd built over the years. He never pushed, never preached, never tried to corner me into belief. He just lived differently. There was a peace about him that I couldn't quite explain, a calm that didn't depend on success or applause or how many people knew his name. I'd seen plenty of people talk about faith, but this guy walked it. You could see it in the way he treated people, in the way he handled disappointment, in the way he forgave things that would have broken another man in two. I remember one evening we were sitting out on his porch watching the sun go down, two old men with more years behind us than ahead. I asked him, "What's your secret?" He smiled and said, "It's not a secret, Clint. It's a savior." I'll be honest, I wasn't sure what to do with that. I'd spent a lifetime trusting what I could see, what I could build with my own hands. Faith seemed like smoke, nice to look at, but impossible to hold. But he didn't come at me with sermons or Bible verses. He just told me his story. He talked about the mess he used to be, the guilt he carried, the way he'd tried everything the world told him would fill that hole: money, pleasure, status, and how none of it worked. Then one night when he hit rock bottom, he met Christ, and everything changed. Not overnight, not magically, but deeply. It's not religion, he told me. Religion tries to fix you from the outside in. Jesus changes you from the inside out. That stuck with me. I'd seen religion. I'd seen people use God like a business card or a political tool. But this was something different, something real. He talked about grace like a man who'd tasted it, about forgiveness like someone who knew how much it cost. The way he spoke about Jesus wasn't distant or formal. It was personal, almost like he was talking about a friend who'd pulled him out of a burning building. And maybe that's exactly what it was. Over time, I started noticing the difference between the life I was living and the one he had. Mine was full, but not whole. His was simple, but steady. I couldn't explain it, but I couldn't ignore it either. He never demanded I believe what he believed. He just left a trail of light behind him. And one day, I realized I was following it. That's how it started. Not with an argument, but with an invitation. Not with pressure, but with peace. And that peace, it wouldn't let me go. I'd read a lot of scripts in my life, some good, some forgettable, but none of them ever read like this one. The Bible had always been a book that sat on other people's shelves, not mine. I thought I already knew what it said: rules, rituals, judgment, stories from another world. But when I finally opened it, not for research, not for argument, but out of a quiet hunger, I found something I didn't expect. I found a person. Not a distant figure in stained glass, not the soft, painted Jesus hanging on a church wall, but someone alive, strong, merciful, real. The kind of man who could stand in the middle of chaos and calm it with a word. The kind who touched lepers when no one else would. Who defended a woman everyone else condemned, who looked straight into the eyes of the broken and said, "You're forgiven." I'd spent my whole career telling stories about men who wrestled with justice, redemption, and guilt, but in those pages I met the source of every story I'd ever tried to tell. When Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," it didn't sound arrogant, it sounded like the truth itself speaking. He wasn't offering religion, he was offering rescue. And I started to see it everywhere in the movies I made and the roles I played, even in the moments of silence between takes. Every tale of sacrifice, every act of courage, every redemption arc, it all pointed to him. William Money and Unforgiven, haunted by his past but given one last chance at grace. Walt Kowalski in Gran Torino, giving his life to save someone else. Those weren't just characters, they were echoes. Echoes of a greater story, one I hadn't realized I'd been chasing all along. What struck me most wasn't his power, it was his mercy. Hollywood glorifies strength, control, dominance. But this man, he conquered by surrendering. He saved the world not by taking life, but by giving his own. And for the first time, I saw that real strength doesn't come from standing tall, it comes from kneeling. I remember closing that book one night and just sitting there in silence, thinking, if this is who he really is, then everything I thought I knew about life and meaning has to change. I'd spent decades directing stories about redemption, but this was the first time I understood what redemption truly meant. It wasn't something you could earn, it was something offered. And it wasn't just a story, it was the story. The one all of us are living in, whether we realize it or not. I've always believed a man should face the truth head on, no smoke, no mirrors. And that's exactly what I had to do when I finally stopped running from the biggest question of all. What comes after this life? I'd studied the evidence, wrestled with the philosophy, weighed the arguments. I'd seen death on the screen 100 times, but now I was staring it down in the mirror. And somewhere between reason and exhaustion, I realized that faith isn't a debate to be won, it's a door you either walk through or you don't. That night, I dropped the act. No cameras, no audience. Just me, an old man with calloused hands and too many regrets, kneeling for the first time, not out of defeat, but surrender. I remember whispering, God, if you're real, I need you. I can't keep doing this on my own. There were no flashes of light, no voices from the sky, just silence and then something deeper than silence. Peace. It wasn't loud or emotional. It was quiet, steady, like the moment the wind stops and everything finally stands still. I didn't feel changed. I was changed. The burden I'd been carrying for years, the guilt, the striving, the need to prove myself, lifted like dust in the air. It felt like coming home after a lifetime on the road. You know that feeling when you've been driving for hours through storm and darkness, and suddenly you see your porch light glowing in the distance? That's what it was like. Not religion, not ritual, just being found. For the first time, I wasn't chasing the next success or the next answer. I'd found the only thing worth finding, grace. I realized faith isn't about climbing your way up to God, it's about letting Him climb down to you. That's what He did in Christ, and it didn't make me perfect, it made me free. People think surrender means weakness. I used to think that too. But the truth is, it takes more courage to kneel than to stand alone. It takes more strength to admit you're lost than to pretend you know the way. That night, I didn't find a religion, I found a relationship. And from that moment on, I wasn't the man who had to carry his own story anymore. I became part of a greater one. That's the night Clint Eastwood, the man the world thought had everything, finally found what really mattered. Not fame, not legacy, just peace. You know, after that night when I finally laid it all down, something shifted inside me, not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but in the quiet corners of my soul. For the first time in my life, I knew peace. Not the kind you buy with a plane ticket to the mountains or a glass of whiskey at the end of a long day. This was different. It was steady. It was the kind of peace that doesn't depend on how the world's treating you, but on who's holding you up. I stopped waking up haunted by the things I couldn't change. The weight I'd carried, mistakes, regrets, the ghosts of yesterday finally lifted. It was like breathing clean air after living in smoke for decades. I realized peace isn't the absence of problems, it's the presence of someone bigger than your problems. Then came purpose. You spent a lifetime chasing legacy, trying to carve your name into stone, thinking that's what matters. But faith flips that on its head. I stopped living to build a monument to myself and started living to reflect the one who saved me. My work, my relationships, even the way I see strangers, it all changed. I began to understand that the measure of a man isn't what he leaves behind, but who he serves while he's here. Legacy fades, purpose endures. Transformation came next, and it wasn't something I forced. It was something that started happening on the inside. The pride, the anger, the stubborn streak that used to drive me, they started losing their grip. The Bible talks about being a new creation, and I'll tell you, that's not poetry. It's real. It's the difference between pretending to be good and actually being changed. I stopped trying to manage my own flaws, like an actor covering up lines. I let God rewrite the script altogether. And finally, there was hope. Not wishful thinking, not everything's going to work out optimism, but real, unshakable hope. The kind that stares death in the face and doesn't flinch because it knows death doesn't get the last word. I've seen enough of this world to know it's broken war, injustice, loss. But I've also seen that with Christ, none of it is wasted. One day, every wrong will be made right, every tear wiped away. That's not fantasy. That's the promise of a God who keeps his word. So, yeah, I still walk through storms. Life hasn't gone soft on me. But I walk through them differently now, lighter, freer, with my eyes on something greater. Because once you've tasted peace, purpose, transformation, and hope, you stop just surviving and start really living. You know, in this world, people don't like hearing the word only. It sounds too narrow, too final. We live in a time when everyone wants options, multiple paths, endless choices, a version of truth that fits whatever feels right. I get it. I used to think the same way. I told myself all religions were climbing the same mountain, just from different sides. But one day, I stopped and really thought about it. If every road leads to the same place, why did Jesus say, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me"? He didn't leave room for maybe. He didn't say a way. He said the way. Now, that either makes him the biggest liar who ever lived, or the Son of God he claimed to be, and that's where the line is drawn. Truth isn't a buffet where you pick what you like. It's a door, you either walk through it or you don't. I've heard people say it's arrogant to believe Jesus is the only way, but if you really think about it, it's the most humble truth there is. Every other religion tells you to climb your way up to God, pray enough, work enough, be good enough, maybe you'll make it. Christianity says God climbed down to us. That's grace, that's the difference. It's not man reaching for heaven, it's heaven reaching for man. And when you really see that, when you understand what the cross means, you stop asking why there's only one way and start asking why there's any way at all, because none of us could ever earn it. I've lived long enough to see the best and worst of human nature. We're capable of kindness and cruelty, love and hate, creation and destruction, all in the same breath. If we're honest, we know there's something broken in us that no philosophy, no self-help, no amount of good intentions can fix. That's why we need a Savior who's more than human, someone who can bridge that gap between who we are and who we were meant to be. Only someone fully God and fully man could do that. Only Jesus did. And here's the thing, it's not about exclusion, it's about invitation. The door is narrow, but it's wide open to anyone willing to walk through. Doesn't matter where you've been, what you've done, how far you've fallen. Grace doesn't check credentials, it just asks for surrender. That's what makes it beautiful, that's what makes it true. So when people ask me why I believe Jesus is the only way, I tell them because he's the only one who came looking for me when I was lost. I've told a lot of stories in my life, stories about heroes and villains, about justice and revenge, about men trying to find their way in a world that doesn't play fair. But this one isn't about a man riding into town to save the day. It's about a God who rode straight into the mess of humanity to save us from ourselves. And if you remember nothing else from everything I've said tonight, remember this: God doesn't want your performance. He wants your heart. He's not looking for religion, rituals, or resumes. He's looking for a relationship, one that's real, personal, and unbreakable. You don't have to clean yourself up to come to Him. You come as you are, and He does the cleaning. That's grace. That's the difference. I used to think I was too far gone for that kind of forgiveness. Maybe you feel the same way. Maybe you've done things you're ashamed of, things that still wake you up at 3 a.m. You think, there's no way God could forgive someone like me. But let me tell you something: the thief on the cross thought the same thing. He was a criminal dying for his crimes, with nothing left to offer but a single desperate sentence: remember me. And Jesus, in his last breath, said, today you'll be with me in paradise. No sermons, no good deeds, no time to make it right, just grace. Pure, undeserved grace. If there was hope for him, there's hope for you. I've met men who thought they didn't need God because they had everything: money, fame, respect. I've met others who thought they didn't deserve God because they'd lost everything. Truth is, we're all in the same boat. We all fall short. We all need saving. And that's what Christ came to do, not to condemn us, but to redeem us. He doesn't just forgive your past. He gives you a future, a purpose, a peace that no storm can shake. So here's my invitation, not from an actor or a preacher, but from one man who's been there. Don't wait for the perfect moment. There isn't one. Don't wait to get your life together. You can't. You come to Him right where you are, right now, because time's shorter than you think, and eternity's longer than you can imagine. I gave my life to Christ because I finally realized I couldn't save myself. And what I found wasn't rules or religion, it was freedom. Real freedom, the kind that sets your soul at rest. And I promise you this: once you find Him, you'll never be the same, because when you meet Jesus, you don't just find faith, you find life.